I wasn't familiar with the mountains. I was a so-called city boy, as my girlfriend had called me many, many times. I grew up with traffic and buildings so big they seemed to never end. So, as you could imagine, a weekend getaway to a secluded cabin was a bit iffy for me. A week alone with Hayden? Absolutely. I don't care about the location. Sign me up. No work, no stress, just her and I. That would be heaven. However, she and I would be accompanied by Lydia, her best friend, and Lydia's boyfriend, Jordan. Lydia, being Hayden's best friend since middle school, she was cool. Jordan was quiet, but not boring by any means. Hayden seemed so excited when they presented us this opportunity to come stay a week with them. A nice deal on a beautiful cabin rented by locals in southern Appalachia, right up her alley. I had always harbored a sense of guilt, having taken Hayden from her home in the mountains to come live with me in the city. She was happy enough, but when she thought I wasn't looking, I could tell she missed home. Her eyes dropped and began to water sometimes for no reason at all, and I knew it was because of the move, and I knew it was because of me. Because of this reason, I didn't throw up any of my objections when she mentioned this trip. I wanted to ask, why don't we just save our vacation days and take a trip, just us? But I refrained. Plus, I know myself well enough to say that I have a tendency to see the negative in anything. I don't know why. Hayden was the one to notice it first, and I made an effort to stop. It's not that I was an unhappy person. I just like to complain. Hayden would let me go on tirades from time to time about random everyday things I hate, like those stupid decorative hand towels. If you have hand towels strictly for looks, fuck you. I want to dry my hands, not on my clothes, on a towel. Anyway, with all that in mind, I didn't want to directly complain or be even a little negative about this trip around Hayden. I wanted her to enjoy getting out of the city and seeing her old friend. On the way to the cabin, Hayden told me stories about her childhood and what it was like growing up in a place so wild and vast. Stories of myths and legends she had heard about from the older generations in her family. Some I had already heard, some I didn't know. Like the story she told me on our first date, the one where her mother, or mama, decapitated a snake and let her and her cousin study the dead body so that they knew the markings of a copperhead. Yeah, just dropped that on me in the middle of a Starbucks. She retold that one, giggling through it, because it wasn't until I told her that the story was absolutely crazy did she realize that incident was weird. As we were rolling up to the cabin, I began to feel dread enter my body. And no, not because Hayden's scary Appalachian stories. Have you ever had that gut feeling when you're somewhere you know you shouldn't be? I thought to myself, scolding my brain, stop being so negative. Coasting down the red dirt road, gravel and small rocks flung from under my tires and bounced into the all-consuming forest next to the road. A small clearing opened up, and just on the other side stood a 2-floor cabin. The outside was lit up by fairy lights and tiki torches made for keeping away bugs. The roof was green, as were the shutters, and there were big windows on the top floor, but only very small ones on the bottom. This detail made the cabin seem top-heavy. I didn't point this out to Hayden because I thought maybe it was just some Appalachian thing I didn't know about. There was still a good stretch until we reached the cabin, so as we were driving through the clearing, I watched the tree line. Thick pines lined side by side. There was probably half a mile between the car and the tree line when I saw a person standing right behind the first line of trees. I adjusted my glasses and squinted. Lydia? I thought. We knew Lydia and Jordan would arrive before us because they lived closer. I smiled and waved at her. She was pretty bubbly, so I was expecting a big wave in return, but I was met with nothing. Not even a smile or a nod. My windows aren't tinted, and she was looking right at me. She had to have seen me. I turned and looked at Hayden, who was peering out her window and saying something about something. Sorry, what did you say? I asked, ignoring that I had seen Lydia. I didn't know there was a gazebo on the property. It's so pretty. I'd love to just lay down in there, she answered, grinning like a child. When we rolled up to the cabin steps, Jordan was standing in front of the door waving. Hayden and I both stepped out of the car and walked up the steps to him. Lydia came out of the door and stepped around Jordan to get to Hayden. They hugged and got a little emotional as Jordan and I stood there awkwardly smiling. You guys are finally here. I missed you so much, Lydia said, inviting us in. I know. I thought I'd never see you again. Hayden and Lydia went off to tour the cabin together, and I got my luggage out. Jordan sat on the couch, and after I brought my things in, I plopped in the seat next to him. Truth is, I didn't really know him that well, but I managed to go to my favorite line when meeting another guy for the first time. So, what do you do for work? He looked up from his phone and began explaining whatever it is that he does. However, as he spoke, I kept thinking about Lydia in the woods. How did she beat us to the cabin? Why did she act like she didn't see us drive up, and that us finally being here is a surprise? Do I even mention it? Nick, our room is really nice, Hayden said from behind me. I felt her slide her hand over my head above me. She looked funny from that angle and even taller because I was sitting down. Even if she looked silly, I still thought she was gorgeous. She had a small freckle right on the line of her upper lip on the right side. It's something you could only see if you were really close. It was very faint, and it made me glad that I'm one of the few people who actually knew about it. She didn't let anyone get as close to her as I've gotten. Ah, great, I said in just enough time before Lydia could come and suggest her idea for our first night. So, I was thinking, because it's already pretty late into the evening, and I'm sure that you guys are tired from the trip, we should just watch a movie, have a huge movie night. Jordan grinned and nodded. There's a lot of spare blankets. We can make a pallet on the floor like a sleepover. I looked up at Hayden, who was smiling down at me, and agreed. The girls did the popping of popcorn while we made the living room floor into one big bed. I never thought I'd be doing something like this with another man at the age of 23, but a man does a lot of things when he's in love. After we were settled in, Hayden made the suggestion that we start with comedy, go to horror, and then end with comedy. We all agreed that was best to make sure no one got bored or too scared. After the second of many, many movies, I had to pee badly, so I stood up and found my way to one of the half baths. A sink and a toilet in a small beige room. Next to the toilet was a small window. I unzipped my pants and let the stream fall. In my satisfaction, I looked out of the small window and saw something move. A figure. A person. With shoulder-length blonde hair. I adjusted myself into my boxers and stepped closer to the window without zipping my pants. I again squinted and saw that it was Jordan, clear as day. Even without his glasses, I could tell it was him. Tall white guy with longish hair. That's Jordan. He raised his hand and motioned for me to come outside. Why was he out there? Why is he looking right at me? Then another more important question struck me. Why does he want me to come out there? I zipped up and went over to the sink to wash my hands. That feeling of dread was still hanging over me, and now even stronger. I pulled myself together and headed back into the living room. Hayden was sitting there on our side, listening to Lydia tell her the latest town drama. So-and-so is pregnant, this person got married, this person was caught cheating, yada yada. And Jordan was right next to Lydia, playing some game on his phone that made his face change colors from the bright glow. I stood at their feet, not sitting until I got this question out. Did anyone go outside? I blurted out to them. Lydia cocked her head like a dog, and Hayden furrowed her brow at me. This answered my question. I looked crazy. No, we've all been here, Lydia answered. I shook my head and sat down. It was a figment of my imagination, my stupid brain trying to ruin a perfectly good trip. A few hours later, we all turned into our bedrooms. We slept on opposite sides of the cabin out of privacy's sake. They were upstairs, and our bedroom was downstairs next to the kitchen. I really didn't want to hear those two going at it all hours of the night anyway. The bathroom for mine and Hayden's room was impressive. Living in a small apartment in the city, I had forgotten big luxurious bathrooms like this one existed. In the center was a big tub, and I decided to indulge and take a soak. Hayden sat next to the tub on the floor, looking through some old magazines she had found in the cabin. The silence was a nice break. We had the small window open, and all we could hear was the breeze running through the pines. "You thought someone was outside?" she asked. "Yeah," I kinda chuckled to keep from looking completely insane. I could have sworn I saw Jordan out by the bathroom window. He was looking right at me. He didn't have any glasses on, though. I heard her stop turning, and she whipped around to face me. She blinked at me a few times, shrugged, and said, "He was with us the whole time. Nothing is around the property. Maybe it was your own reflection." She offered up a sweet smile and turned back around. I was asleep in our bed when I heard a sound coming from our bathroom to the right. I looked over, but I couldn't see anything in there. But the noise continued. A plapping type of noise, like a person's feet and hands crawling over a wet surface. It was fast and skittery, like a seal trying to frantically escape a wet bathtub. Dread fell over me once again, but oddly, was beaten by the thought that some poor animal had gotten in through the small window and was stuck in our tub, unable to climb out. I should have known better by the sound alone. Nonetheless, I went into the bathroom, flicked on the lights, and saw Hayden. She was in our bathtub, her clothes all mangled. Why isn't she in her pajamas? I thought. Hayden? She had gone still and quiet. Her back was to me, and she was hunched over. Her clothes looked damp, as if she had been throwing herself around the tub. Her hair was a mess of tangled brown, and the smell. Why did she smell like that? I got closer, worried. Maybe she was sick. As I inched toward her, I could hear her breathing, snarling like a spoiled chihuahua. The closer I got, the more I noticed the dirty hand and footprints on the tub, like she had been outside, digging in dirt, barefoot. "Hayden?" I said more firmly this time. Are you all right?" "Nick?" I heard from the bedroom. It was Hayden, her voice at least, calling me from our bed. She sounded sleepy. I turned and looked into the doorway. I could see her sitting up in bed, rubbing her eyes like she had just woken up. Quick, frantic plapping erupted behind me. I spun around to see Hayden from the tub crawl out of the window. I could hear her bones in her shoulders breaking and dislocating as she squeezed through. "What the fuck?" I said under my breath. Muddy feet and handprints covered the tile floor, even the counters. Hayden was getting out of bed now to check on me, but I rushed to her before she could come into the bathroom. "Is everything okay?" "Mm-hmm. I think I was just dreaming." I didn't sleep that night. The next day came and went, and everything was normal. We went into the nearby town, window shopped, and got extra groceries. I thought Hayden's accent was strong, but nothing could have prepared me for how these locals spoke. I needed pretty much everything they said translated. Jordan and I would exchange glances sometimes, and I realized he was just as lost as me. I got some cleaning supplies for the mess in the bathroom. I lied and told Hayden that there was a problem with the drain. That evening, after scrubbing the bathroom for only about 20 minutes, it didn't take as long as I thought, I stepped back out into the living room. Lydia and Hayden were folding laundry while Jordan cooked something over the stove. Hayden smiled at me, which, before I could stop it, made me blush a little. We had been together for 4 years, but she still made me so nervous. I could never shake the feeling that she was simply too good for me. You know, Lydia told me something. She motioned for me to come sit beside her on the bar stool, and I happily followed those orders. The reason there are small windows down here and big ones upstairs, she began rubbing my back with her fingertips, my favorite, is to keep critters out. My blood ran cold. What? I asked. Consumed by my fear, I started thinking. These windows down here are still big enough for a raccoon or possum. The only thing that couldn't fit through is a human. The other three didn't realize this, which I understand because they hadn't been seeing the things I've seen. Animals can fit through here. I pointed to the window across the kitchen, and I watched Hayden think. Well, I mean, harmless animals can fit through, but not like a bear or something dangerous, Lydia argued. Then Jordan said something that made my heart freeze in places. Most of the houses in town are like that too. A few of them were even on stilts. I've only seen that with houses on marshland. I guess bears are a big issue up here. Lydia finished folding a towel. I noticed that, yeah. This cabin kinda seems like the only one with big windows at all, actually. Hayden moved her hand off my back. Probably so that it's easier to rent out, you know? Big, beautiful windows with a view of the mountains. People will pay top dollar for that. I stopped listening. People around here know that something is off. Maybe they also have seen the mimicking. Anyway, Lydia and I are going to venture out into the woods to look for mushrooms soon. Jordan and you are going to have some guy time. You're going into the woods? Can't you guys wait until morning at least? I said this before I could stop myself. The girls left even after I tried to convince them that maybe they should stay. Jordan made hamburgers and watched football, while I bit my fingernails and pretended to watch the TV. You look fucking crazy right now, Nick. Pull your shit together. Jordan offered me a beer, and I'm no drinker, but I drank a few more than I should have. I was feeling pretty good, though. It was around 6:30 when the girls left, and now it was close to 9. My brain told me to worry, but the alcohol told me to relax. Suddenly, Lydia comes burling through the door, out of breath and screaming so shrill I thought my ears would explode. I can't find her, she sobbed. I lost her. How can I lose her? She nearly collapsed on the floor. Jordan kneeled down to hold her. What are you talking about? You lost Hayden? He said, scooping her off the floor. Lydia shook like a leaf in his arms. Nick was outside. She looked at me confused. Jordan shook his head. No, baby. Nick was with me. No, she cried. Hayden saw Nick and followed him. I heard her scream. I stepped close to the crying puddle that was Lydia. Did I have my glasses on? I asked bluntly. I watched her think in confusion. Then it hit her. She muttered, No, you didn't. You're blind without them. Hayden told me that. All three of us stood there, exchanging looks, baffled. Something is wrong here, I said finally. I've been seeing the mimicking too. I've seen all three of you and... The door opened. It was Hayden. Thanks for leaving me out there, she said sarcastically, setting down her basket of mushrooms. I sprained my ankle. We all stared at her, unmoving. Suddenly Lydia spoke. You saw Nick out there? Hayden shook her head. No, I thought I did, but it was a shadow. Lydia stood up. But I saw him too. Jordan stepped in. Lydia, he was here. Stop crying, honey. She's back now. Hayden smiled at me, and I ran to hug her. In my excitement that she was okay, I forgot about everything Lydia said and what I was this close to dropping on the group. Later that night, laying in bed, Hayden sat on my lap and looked down at me. She usually didn't like sitting here because of our size difference, even though I told her several times that I liked it a lot. In my drunken, sleepy, and admittedly horny state of mind, I was tracing my fingertip along her face, over the freckles on her forehead, down her nose that turned up at the end ever so slightly, her dusty pink lips, and my favorite detail, that freckle. I moved my finger over her lips, expecting to see it like I always had. Nothing. It wasn't there. I leaned in closer and squinted. I knew her face better than I knew my own, and freckles don't disappear. I was sobering up a little, and when I looked up into her eyes, I now realized they seemed glossed over, as if she were looking through me, not at me. "I want to take you to the woods," she said at me. "You'll like it there. There's something for you there. You have something to fulfill there." I tried to play it cool. Oh yeah?" She nodded, but not up and down, back and forth like she didn't understand how nodding worked. Her eyes got excited, and I heard a small squeak slide out of her mouth. Something became perfectly clear. This isn't Hayden on my lap. I needed an excuse to get up so I could go warn the other two, and hopefully we could find the real Hayden. "I'll go get my coat out of the living room, and we'll have a late-night adventure." I forced a smile at this creature. It smiled and laid to the side while I hopped up and quickly, trying my best without looking suspicious, made my way into the living room. I could feel its eyes watch me the entire time. I noticed the back porch light was on, and a small shadow was dancing around out there. Lydia. I pulled the knob on the door to rush out there just as she was coming in. We startled each other, and we both screamed, causing Jordan to dart downstairs from their bedroom in a panic. "Oh," he said, fixing his robe. "It's you guys." Lydia began before I could. "What the fuck? How were you upstairs? I was just outside with you." "What?" Jordan suddenly looked panicked, too. "Babe, you were in the shower." They stared at one another before turning to me. We were thinking the same thing. I began to speak, feeling like I was going to burst, but I had to keep my voice low. "They're mimicking us all. I don't know how it works, but..." I heard footsteps behind me. "What's with all the yelling?" it said, copying her accent. I wanted to yell and tell them that that wasn't Hayden, but I didn't know how that thing would react. "The mimicking thing is outside, and one in our bathroom," Lydia blurted. "What the hell is going on?" The thing standing next to me, pretending to be Hayden, tried to contort its stolen face into empathy, maybe? Its eyebrows furrowed and unfurrowed a few times. Its mouth twitched in and out of a smile. Lydia looked at it, thinking she was talking to Hayden. "I know my grandparents would tell me about these mimics in the woods, but there's no way they're real, right? Fuck, you know more about this than I do." It smiled back at her. Its voice became raspy, as if it couldn't hang on to this form much longer. "Well, we should all go into the woods together," it said calmly. As Lydia seemingly had it distracted, I backed up into the kitchen slowly. I could feel my legs shaking. My heart felt like a hummingbird in my chest. I grabbed the bar stool Hayden had been sitting on earlier that day doing laundry, lifted it high into the air, and brought it down, crashing onto Hayden's skull. There was a loud crack, like someone splitting open a watermelon with a hatchet. Hayden's body fell to the floor, blood oozing out of her open head. The sound of blood gurgling made its way from her throat. Her hands and feet twitched. Her eyes fluttered until they rested at half open, and her mouth quivered, her last words still hanging onto her lips. I put the stool down just as Lydia began to shriek. She ran towards me, fists banging into my chest and arms. "What the fuck is wrong with you? You just killed my best friend, you bastard! It wasn't enough for you to make her move away, you had to kill her too?" Lydia's words stung more than her blows. Her tears and snot flung off her face and onto me with every slam of her fist. Jordan tried collecting her and holding her arms down, but she melted onto the floor beside Hayden, hugging her back. Jordan looked at me, searching my face for an answer, and suddenly his eyes got big. He grabbed Lydia by the back of her PJs and ripped her off of Hayden's body. That wasn't Hayden. I didn't wait for Lydia to pull herself together before I started explaining myself. I knew that wasn't Hayden. I've been seeing them, I don't know what they're called, the day we got here. I turned towards Lydia, who was now up on her feet, but still staring at the body and crying. I saw you in the wood line. And you saw me when you took a piss, Jordan finished. Lydia jumped in. So, Hayden, the real Hayden, is still in the woods? I nodded. Lydia, you'll have to take me there, where the two of you went to get the mushrooms. She whimpered with fear, and I couldn't blame her. Nowhere was safe, but especially not the woods. There's flashlights upstairs in our bathroom closet. One of us will have to go up there, Jordan said. I'll do it. I grabbed a part of the broken bar stool leg and began to slowly head upstairs. Honestly, seeing Hayden's body like that made me feel so awful. I knew in my mind that it wasn't her laying there, but my heart kept thinking it was. I climbed the stairs and snuck into their bedroom. The shower was still on, so I peeked into the bathroom. The shower curtain was closed, but I could see Lydia's silhouette, doing the same thing the mimic in our bathroom was doing, flapping around on all fours. I could hear that awful snarling and heavy breathing. It was only now that I realized what they were doing, licking the water up. I eased past the shower to the bathroom closet. Luckily, the door to the closet was open, so I slid inside. The flashlights were right in front of my face. Thank God I didn't have to dig for them. I grabbed 3 and stepped out of the closet. It was out of the shower, looking at me, naked. Its mouth was slightly open, and I could hear a squeaking from within its throat, like a happy bird. Between those squeaks were small snarls. It began to speak, its voice breaking and croaking. It would be so pleased with you all. 4. It trailed off. 4 would be perfect. You're not Lydia. I held out the broken chair leg. It growled, low, like a cat would. It leaped towards me, but then threw its body to the side, sending it out of the window. I watched it crawl on all fours back into the woods. I booked it down the stairs to find Lydia and Jordan staring over the Hayden. Its body had started shaking and making some squeaking noises like the Lydia from the shower. I shoved the flashlights into their hands and ran out the front door. Come on! They followed behind. I let Lydia lead the way. She was sobbing and jumping at every crunch of a leaf. Her flashlight was shaking light against the trees. She wiped her nose. How do we know she's not dead? It doesn't need to kill you to use your body as a lure for others. I think it just needs to see you. Giving it attention gives it power, I said, hardly believing what was coming out of my mouth was real. They keep trying to lure us to the woods, I said, marching behind Lydia in the dark. Yeah, the one on the back porch kept trying to get me to follow him, into the woods, Lydia said. Yours did the same thing, Jordan added. We got a little deeper into the woods, and I heard a muffled sound. I motioned for the other 2 to be quiet, and they froze in their tracks. I heard it again. It was Hayden. I ran towards the sound, and I tripped over something. She was laying on the forest floor, and I tripped right over her. I grabbed her and made sure she wasn't hurt. I could see tear streaks down her cheeks. We helped her up, and I hugged her tight. Short-lived, because then Lydia was ripping us apart and clinging herself to Hayden. I was so scared. I thought I saw you, she said. Her voice was trembling. Suddenly, she stopped sobbing and stared over my shoulder. I was scared to turn around and face what was behind us, but I turned and saw a mirror? No. Me, but not me. Something was off. The eyes were too close together. And again, no glasses. It spoke with my voice. You're all here. It started whispering to itself, slowly losing its grip it began to shake. It peeled out of my body to reveal what could only be described as a human nervous system with a gray shadow as the flesh. It was taller than all of us. Its eyes were small and bright white. My body fell to the ground in front of me and fizzled like soda pop until it disappeared. We wasted no time to run. We ran and ran. We could hear each other's voices. The mimics called out around us. "Here! This way! I'm over here! Please!" We ignored them until we couldn't hear them, and we stopped running. "They're working for something," Lydia said between deep breaths. "Something that scares even them." I looked around, trying to gauge where we were. I slipped my keys out of my pocket and made my car beep. We weren't that far. I looked back at the three of them. "Follow me." I led us into the clearing that was in front of the cabin. We peeked around the trees to see if we saw ourselves anywhere, and when we came to the conclusion that we were safe, I grabbed Hayden's hand and ran like hell to my car. I made sure she got in before I flung myself into the driver's seat. I watched Jordan and Lydia climb into his truck and threw my car in reverse. Fuck turning around, I could drive backwards. I slammed my foot on the gas and gravel slid under my tires. Before I could stop, I hit something behind me. A huge thud. Then a terrifying shriek. It was Hayden. It looked at me with her eyes. Its nose had been busted. Its left arm was twisted and broken. Before Jordan plowed into it, it managed to run off to the side, heading towards the gazebo. I kept reversing. Fuck that. Jordan was right on my dash. We reversed down the driveway into the main road and sped off. I could hear my own voice yelling in the distance. "Please!" it cried. "Feed it!" I was going around 90 down this rocky dirt road, Jordan's truck behind me. I was so happy to be heading back home. I don't know what the fuck transpired here, and I didn't want to know. I looked over to the passenger seat where Hayden was just staring straight ahead. "I'm sorry. So much has happened. Are you okay?" I took my hand off the wheel and placed it on hers. Her hand felt cold, which it should. She had been out on the forest floor for hours. "Hayden?" I squeezed her hand. I heard a croak erupt from her throat, followed by a squeak. Yes?" I began to slow my car down. I couldn't take my eyes off of her. "Hayden, face me," I said firmly. "Look at me!" I yelled. She stayed unmoving. I started to shake with anger. Now was not the time for her to play a silly joke on me. She turned towards me, keeping her head and her eyes down. "What's your problem?" "When's your birthday?" I demanded. "What? You're being silly." A whine escaped her mouth. I swerved over to the side of the road and grabbed her by her hair and yanked her through my car, out the driver's side. "I know you're not her." I shoved it to the ground. "When did you switch?" I started kicking it over and over. It squealed just like she would have, but I didn't let up. "By the time you return, she will have served her purpose." It looked up at me, using her bruised face against me. I wanted to hold it, coddle it, and apologize, but I had to stay strong. I rushed to get back into my car just as Jordan and Lydia were rolling down the windows to ask what was going on. "Go, get out of here," I yelled to them. "I should have checked better." I sped past them and headed back towards the cabin. I cut into the driveway and sped up the steps. I flung open my door and began calling her name. I looked around and saw nothing, not even a mimic. I started shouting louder than I knew I could as I jogged around the property. I picked up one of the flashlights we had dropped. I passed the gazebo and saw something on the floor. Curled up in a fetal position, there she was. She was right. It was beautiful. I got closer and she didn't react. I shined my light on her and she remained still. Tears built up in my eyes when I saw her fingers. her bloody face and her twisted arm. No, 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 I muttered to myself. I licked my thumb and cleaned off her lip, the freckle. I carefully patted her leg. Hayden? Her eyes fluttered until they opened slightly. She reached her hand out, and I took it. You need to leave, Nick. It's worse than we thought. I didn't mean to hit you. I thought the one on the ground was you. Where were you? She blinked slowly. Even blinking looked painful. I followed you, or what I thought was you. It took me to the middle of the woods. She began to shake. And I saw it. I saw whatever it is that controls them. It looked like a mountain. Luckily, I think it's unable to move. She coughed up some blood. I was able to get away. You need to go, she begged. Come with me. We'll get you some help, and all of this will be over, I said. I put her arm over my shoulder and helped her up. We hobbled to my car, but we both stood still when we heard running coming from in front of us. What sounded like a stampede was coming from behind the cabin. Soon those same tall nervous systems with gray flesh were running past the cabin, straight for us. There had to be hundreds. I knew we couldn't fight or outrun them, so I held Hayden close. I'm so sorry, I whispered to her as we braced for impact. But I heard them run past us. Each and every one of them acted like we weren't even there. I looked up and saw that they had not even gotten close to us. On both sides of us, they ran and squeaked and whined. Something had spooked them. Hayden lifted her head, then looked at the ground. It was shaking. We looked at each other, completely baffled. She looked over the cabin, and in the distance we could see pine trees being laid to their sides. It's coming, Hayden cried out. Their leader, or whatever the fuck it is. We can't outrun this, Nick. My brain went blank when I saw its head over the cabin. A tall, skinny creature with the head of a deer's skull and the body of a bear. Its stomach was sunken in like it was starving. Its body was covered in rocks and dirt, like it had been sitting still between the mountains for a long time. How did you escape it? I ran. It seemed to stop following when I got to the torches, Hayden answered. I noticed that this creature, or god, or whatever the fuck it was, wasn't eyeing us anymore. It was looking at the tiki torches. Get in the car. What? Get in the car. I helped Hayden into the driver's seat, grabbed a torch, and ran towards the cabin. I could hear Hayden screaming and pleading with me as I ran. I bashed the torch against the curtains and the couches, the beds, anything with fabric. I turned the oven on and lit the kitchen towels on fire. I set the cabin ablaze. I ran out of the back door, down the porch steps, and looked up to face the godly being in front of me. I watched it back away, screeching loud, sounding like a mix between an elk call and a train horn. Some of the fur on its big concave stomach caught on fire, and it began stumbling backward. I heard a voice coming from my left. I tried to ignore it, but it was me. It was staring at me with my own eyes, breathing with my mouth, and standing with my legs. You are a bad person, it hissed. I blinked at it. It was using my own deep thoughts against me. Its whispering echoed in my ears, and I desperately tried to cover them with my hands. Still, it reached me. You don't deserve happiness. If you weren't here anymore, what would be lost? Its nagging words swarmed my brain like angry yellow jackets. It crept closer. You know how to fix this. I looked up at the burning creature as it continued to screech, and I pondered what I had been saying. Maybe it was right. The porch behind me began to burn. The flames were closing in on me. I was pinned between this deity and a burning cabin. Maybe if I wasn't here anymore, Hayden could be happy. She wouldn't wake up to the sound of traffic or be afraid to walk sidewalks at night. She wouldn't lose me in a big crowd anymore. She wouldn't have to look at all the gray, ugly concrete. She wouldn't have to cover her accent so people didn't assume she was dumb. I stood there and decided that whatever wanted to take me first could have me, and Hayden could go back to her life before me. I laid down on the wet grass and waited. I could feel the big creature step towards me, and I held my breath. "Nick!" Someone shouted behind me, and I heard the back porch come crashing down. Hayden got up from the fiery rubble and limped over to me. Oh my God!" Her voice broke. "Are you okay?" She laid her hand on my chest. I opened my eyes, but I couldn't look at her. "Hayden, Nick, I'm so sorry." She held my hand. "I just want to go back home with you, no matter where home is." I watched her blue eyes well up and spill onto my shirt. I looked up at the creature, which was now craning its neck down to us slowly. "I didn't deserve you. I never did," she cried, watching the monster open its mouth to reveal a set of minivan-sized teeth. "You're right," I said. "You deserved better." I sprung to my feet, still holding her hand, and began climbing into the cabin. I wanted that thing to shove its head right into the ablaze cabin. We ran from what was the back door to the burning front door, the charred steps to Jordan's truck that was waiting on us. I was surprised they turned around, and even more surprised that they waited, considering what was before them. Hayden climbed into the truck, and I followed behind her. We all watched in awe as the creature tore apart the burning cabin, setting itself aflame. Mimics still whipped by the truck as we backed out of the driveway. Hayden got as close to me as possible, wrapped her arms around me, and didn't let me go until we reached the hospital. It's been 6 months since this incident. We've heard nothing from the owners or anyone in that area. I'm convinced that they knew this would happen. I think we were all a sacrifice. Hayden is healed up fine, and she seems a little happier overall. I think she appreciates the city a little bit more now. I still look for her freckle, just to make sure it's always there.